This first chapter, Natives and Newcomers, takes a good look at who were the natives, who established themselves as the natives, and finally, is there a process which all newcomers and their descendants must travel to become established in mainstream American life? Let's begin with an overview of assimilation, the general process through which an immigrant is transformed from the outsiders into full members of a group or society. We know that America is a nation of nations with many different languages. Those who arrived first established schools, churches, newspapers, etc., to form immigrant communities in their land, the place that became home to them. So we ask, if Americans trace their national origins to other countries, do they think of themselves as an ethnic group or a racial group? The popular view has been portrayed in books, in movies, in novels, and whether true or not, immigrants come to America to live the dream without persecution. Immigrants must learn the American way of life. They have to learn how to speak, dress, how to think, how to act. With the first generation immigrants, they will be considered outsiders because of the way they speak, their dress, their manners, where they live, and they generally don't want to give up their old ways of living. The first generation immigrants live in the Chinatowns, the Little Italies, in the Latino barrios. They are even our neighbors. The second generation, the children of immigrants, they attend the public schools, become fluent in English. We were the translators for my parents. I was a second generation, even though my mom was born in the United States. My dad was born in Mexico. They grew up like they were immigrants. For some of us, our names were changed or Americanized. The nice thing is that we really enjoy the best of two worlds. And finally, the third generation. These are grandchildren of the immigrants. They speak mostly English and they move in the mainstream of American life. They have a strong sense of attachment to their ethnic culture. There are three groups that do not fit the three-generation process. They are the non-European groups. The American Indian entered society through conquest and occupation of their territories. They were a mixed population that occurred through intermarriages, and in the 1990 census, it showed that their numbers have increased. The next group is the African American ancestors of Black Americans, and they were brought to America involuntarily as bonded servants or slaves. Of course, there were sexual relations among the black and whites that resulted in more racial mixing than the strict laws prohibited. Consequently, after more than 3 generations, Black Americans, on average, have not fully entered into the mainstream of American. The last group, the Mexican Americans, is a little more complicated. They did not cross the border at first. The border crossed them. Later, they came to fulfill the American dream, and pretty much the border meant nothing to them. There are several factors that affect assimilation. Social power. Throughout history, the white Americans have been the largest group and the one with the power. They hold the positions of authority, whether they came voluntarily or were brought against your will. If you came voluntarily, you will complete the process much more quickly. If it was involuntarily, then you may be reluctant. Another factor is the size, where they live, and when they came. An example may be a few years ago when the U.S. was going through an economic downward trend. Many were shouting about how immigrants were taking away jobs from citizens. Another factor that affects the rate of assimilation is similarities between the culture, the ethnicity of the minority, and the culture of the majority, as well as the racial, the physical identifications of the persons or the group. The three-generation assimilation process is controversial. Robert E. Parks, his theory is called the cycle of race relations. According to Parks, the four stages represent the process by which the integration of peoples and cultures have always and everywhere taken place, and he states that they are apparently progressive and irreversible. In contrast, Milton Gordon presented a new and valuable approach, advocating more specific analysis of the structure of American society and the general process of assimilation. Chapter 2 contains more details of the 7 specific sub-processes of assimilation, and Gordon goes on to show that instead of losing their ethnic membership and identities, networks are formed with individuals of the same co-ethnics of the same class. And then, of course, this results in sub-societies that are called eth-classes. Those that perceive that they share a common ancestry may develop a sense of peoplehood or a group identification. The boundaries between and within racial and ethnic groups are not nearly as sharp and fixed as many people assume. In this slide, we take a look at both. A racial group refers to a person's physical heritage. Some scientists have attempted to distinguish by using physical characteristics. Most of the time, their boundaries are set by social agreements. In 1998, researchers reported that DNA evidence shows that Thomas Jefferson fathered at least one child with his slave. Those descendants have always been considered black. In 2003, Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, and he was a U.S. Senator and a segregationist, he fathered a daughter with his black housekeeper. That was the basis for people to argue that it is a social political concept. In 2000, the U.S. Census allowed people the option to check more than one category. An ethnic group then refers to those whose inclusion is primarily based on similarities of nationality, religion, language, and other aspects of their social political heritage. Lastly, we take a look at just where an individual's places in society should be. It should not be determined by the ascribed characteristics such as race, ethnicity, sex, age, or their family status. Americans believe that it should be dependent on achieved characteristics, the educational level, the occupational skills that one has obtained. Judgments about who is in and who is out are usually usual and routine, and they rest on poor foundations. These are significant barriers to intergroup understanding and the inclusion of minority groups within a society. Here are some questions to think about.